Hello and welcome. My name is Phil Gervasi with Kentik, and with me today is Sunil Kodiyan, a product manager with Kentik and a subject matter expert on synthetics. Now, today we'll be looking specifically at synthetic transaction monitoring, how it works, what problems that you can solve with it, and how you can use transaction monitoring as part of your overall digital experience monitoring solution. So, Sunil, once again, thanks very much for joining me today.
Sure thing. Happy to be here.
So, synthetics is using artificial traffic to test and monitor very specific elements and activities in the network, like device or service availability, page load times, DNS activity, and I guess a lot of that granular host to host activity that requires a more active approach than, I guess you could say, the passive approach that we get from flow data, SNMP, and so on. So I really feel like we're moving up the stack. I get that we can do monitoring at the network and routing layers, and I'm familiar with how a page load tests can tell us how individual components of a web page are loading, but what level is transaction monitoring? Are we now actively monitoring at the application level?
Yeah, great question. So transaction monitoring is actually an expansion of our suite of web application tests that we have at Kentek. As you've already noted, we currently support an HTTP test and a page load test, where an HTTP test is actually testing the front end of your application. So it's testing to see whether the web service that is hosting your application is available and performant. And a page load test is checking to see whether your web application is loading the way it should. A transaction test takes that a step further. So you're actually now interacting with the website as your user would, and for individual steps along that process, you're tracking what the performance of each step is, and if there's a problem along the way, you can troubleshoot to see exactly where the root cause of that problem is.
Okay, so it sounds like synthetic transaction monitoring gives us the ability to examine the behavior, even the experience of an actual end user going through the motions of accessing a typical web application. So, what specific kinds of applications can we really examine using transaction monitoring?
So a transaction test can really be used for any single page web application. So these could be applications that you consume as a consumer, like any SaaS application like Salesforce, Zoom, the G Suite, or any application that you or your employees might be really reliant on to be performant. You could also use transaction testing to test applications that you own. So consider yourself as a DevOps or an SRE. You're responsible for an application that you are hosting for your consumers. How would you know the performance of those applications from your consumer's perspective? That's where a transaction test will help you script your user's interaction with your web page and track the performance of that as well.
So, if I'm an engineer or an SRE, is using synthetic transaction monitoring something that I can use on its own as a standalone monitoring tool, or can I use it as part of I guess, a larger collection of synthetic tests?
Yeah, so transaction testing will actually give you a lot of information about the digital experience of your employees, of your consumers, just by itself. But in conjunction with the network tests that we have at Kentek, it'll help you identify the root cause of these performance issues, whether it's on the network layer, whether it's in the application layer, and so on. And we can even interact with sort of expand or be complementary to APM tools that are out there, like New Relic, for example, that will give you a lot more insight on the application side of things. And you can actually go through the application stack to figure out exactly where your issues might lie.
All right, cool. This is great. So what I'd like to do now, though, is I'd like to see Kentik synthetic transaction monitoring in action. So can you walk us through a demo where we can see how an engineer can use transaction monitoring to solve a digital experience problem?
Sure, absolutely. All right, so we're going to look at a transaction test. And to create a transaction test in Kentek, you would come to the add test page as you would for every other test that you would create. You'll see now under web test, there's a new category of test type available called transaction test. Clicking into this will give you all the options that you would need to configure to set up the test. For this demo, we'll actually take a look at a test that I've already created. This is a test where I'm logging into our very own Kentik portal, the customer portal. And to set this test up, I would first select the number of agents that I would use to execute the script, and then add a Puppeteer script, which is actually a script that is simulating the user's interaction with this particular web page. Once I have those two components, I can save and start testing the transaction script.
So, Sunil, let me interrupt you with a couple quick questions here. Are these Kentik agents that are dispersed around the world, or are folks using Kentik synthetics and then deploying them on their own?
Good question. You can actually do both. In this case, I've used Kentik public agents. So these are essentially agents that Kentik manages and maintains in different parts of the world. These are application agents that can run our web suite of tests. But if a user deploys an application agent, a private application agent of their own, they can include it in the test as well.
All right, so one more quick question for you before we move on. I see that we're using a Puppeteer script within the tool, but where do you actually get that script from? Or is it something that that we create manually?
Yeah, good question as well. So you can create a Puppeteer script manually if you have the know-how or you know how to build a script yourself. For me, I'm a bit of a novice when it comes to Puppeteer, so I actually used what's called the recorder in Chrome DevTools to build this script out. It's as simple as going into your Chrome browser, switch over into the Chrome DevTools, which is essentially all you need to do is right-click and click Inspect. Once you're in here, you have the option to go into recorder mode. And in a recorder, you have the option of actually recording your interaction with the web page, and the recorder will individually save each step that you've done to execute this interaction. Once it's fully captured, you can download the interaction as a Puppeteer script, which you can then just copy and paste into the transaction test itself. So once you have the agents configured, you have the Puppeteer script installed, it's a matter of just running the test itself. The test results will look similar to the other kinds of tests that we run with Kentik. You have a health bar on the top, which is tracking the overall health of your test and points you to moments in time when there might be issues. You can see that these are the four agents that we included in our test. Each one is returning a status of healthy, and they're tracking the overall transaction time to execute the script. You can also see, of course, that for each of the different agents, there are a number of screenshots that are captured. And these are screenshots that I included as part of the script itself. So in the code for the script, I've added sections to capture screenshots at important moments in time. So let's take a look at this and see what kind of information we can get from that. So if I click into details, and as it loads, and I'll just switch over to a page that is already loaded, we can see that we're capturing the same amount of data with transaction time for executing this transaction. And for each moment in time, as I hover over the graph, you can see the transaction time is being compared to a rolling standard deviation. So if it goes past that standard deviation, we can start alerting as either warning or critical. But as I mentioned earlier, we can actually capture screenshots during the execution of the transaction script to see how it's performing over time. So this is the Chrome DevTools being controlled by the Puppeteer script to actually pass the username, the password, and then finally when it's logging into the portal itself. And we can capture moments like this when something's wrong with the transaction. In this case, the trial itself has expired. So a screenshot like this will help to identify what the root cause of your problem might be.
So, Sunil, I have one more question for you. Is there a way to see the individual components of that transaction? Considering there's so many moving parts to someone logging into a web application, I'd like to see the individual components at a very granular level and see how those components are performing individually. Can we do that?
Yeah, definitely. So similar to our page load test, we also have a waterfall graph that is included with the transaction test as well. So what we do here for every page that is visited as part of the transaction, and could be multiple pages, we capture the DOM file for it. So essentially, we can see when, how quickly and when objects on a page have loaded, and this helps us identify any slowness that might occur as a result of one particular object on the page that is taking longer than it should. But ultimately, when you come back here, you can see why a transaction test can be very helpful, because we're tracking the overall transaction time of executing that script that we had just created over time. We're using screenshots to capture moments of time that are important to keep track of that transaction. And if the transaction time varies for whatever reason beyond our standard deviation, which is automatically calculated, we can alert the user at those moments.
Sunil, that was a really great demo, and I can see pretty clearly how we can track the performance of an application over time from the perspective of an end user. But would you say that this is the whole point here, tracking application performance from an end user's perspective?
Absolutely. The purpose of using transaction testing or any synthetic testing essentially is to understand what your end user's experience is, but you're using it in a simulated synthetic fashion so that you can capture issues and problems in performance or availability that might come up even before actual users run into it. So absolutely, yes, that's the purpose of transaction testing and all synthetics. Of course, in today's demo, it was a fairly high level. There's a lot more that we can dig into with transaction testing and with synthetics in general, and we're happy to do that.
Great. Yeah, this has been a great conversation and a great demo of how synthetic transaction monitoring works, at least from a high level, like you said. So, Sunil, thank you again for joining me today and explaining how Kentik's synthetic transaction monitoring solution works and how it helps us solve a digital experience monitoring problem. So if you're interested to learn more about Kentik Synthetics, of course, you can visit our website, kentik.com/synthetics, and check the resources there. And you can always reach out to a Kentik representative as well to learn more and set up a demo. So again, thanks for joining us today, and see you soon.